Shana Tova. Friends, it has come to my attention that we have an election coming up. Really, in just 44 days, folks across this nation will go to the polls. Okay, maybe in less than 44 days, people across this nation will receive their mail ballots and fill them out and send them in, so that in 44 days, we will have a day of election, a day when we select our new elected officials, and this year that includes a presidential election. But it does not only include a presidential election. There are, of course, races and ballot initiatives on the ballot for at the state level, at the local level, at the municipal level. And so I wonder, on this Rosh Hashanah, that I would ask what I thought was a simple question. We know that indeed it is an American value, but is it a Jewish value to vote? And further, I wonder, is Judaism democratic? Is there something inherent to Judaism that makes us value democracy? This ended up not being such a simple set of questions. But to begin to answer, we start by exploring how governance has worked throughout Jewish history. For much of the Torah, the only true authority is God, or God acting through divinely selected leaders, Moses being the paradigmatic example. God is shown as being all-powerful, all-knowing, able to bring down plagues, to split the Red Sea, to appear as both a disembodied voice, a strong whirling tornado, and a still small voice, all in one. And in biblical Judaism, of course, we see a model of theocracy, not of democracy. However, as Rabbi David Rosen points out in his essay on the topic, when you look closer, things start looking a little more pro-democratic. Some of the most well-known moments, he points out, in Torah are essentially democratic. After leading the people out of slavery in Egypt into the wilderness, we read that Moses finds himself trying to perform single-handedly all of the functions of leadership, something to which his father-in-law Jethro, himself a leader in the Midianite community, responds by coaching Moses to delegate authority. To whom was Moses supposed to delegate? Well, in his words, "Bring from among yourselves men of wisdom and understanding, well known to your tribes, and I will appoint them as your leaders." The choice of leaders, therefore, was granted to the people themselves. They were supposed to identify them and show them to Moses, and then Moses would grant them authority. In establishing this system, Moses also sets up a schema, which at least to my contemporary ears, sounds a little bit like an early system of representation. Our text continues that Moses should set these over the community as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, 50s, and 10s. In other words, local magistrates were identified by the members of each tribe, by the members of each clan within each tribe, and perhaps by even smaller subgroupings, for Moses to give authority to in order to rule on disputes and legal matters in their own locale. In other words, to represent the communities from which they came. We think of biblical leadership as being made up of individuals who were selected by God, right? Moses. We read about Abraham and his family members, of course, Isaac, Jacob, the tribes of Jacob that come from, or the tribes of Israel that come to us hereditarily through the sons of Jacob. Aaron alongside Moses, and then each of the judges and then high priests that descend from Aaron and his sons. But as we look deeper into our text, we discover that there may be a little bit process behind this appointment of leaders. In the Talmud, in Masechet Brachot, page 55a, the rabbis ask what is meant by the phrase, a good leader. They point to an intriguing midrash on the appointment of Bezalel, chief artisan of the Mishkan. A good leader, as it is said, the Eternal spoke unto Moses, saying, see, I have called by name Bezalel, son of Uri, son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. Regarding Bezalel's appointment, Rabbi Yitzchak says, one may only appoint a leader over a community if one consults with the community. And the community then agrees to the appointment. As it is said in that verse, Exodus chapter 31, and Moses said to the children of Israel, see, the Eternal has called by name Bezalel. In other words, when it says, Moses says to the children of Israel that God has called Bezalel, that's Moses consulting the people, or not the people approve of this appointment. The Eternal then said to Moses, and now we're back into the rabbi's midrash, Moses, is Bezalel a suitable appointment in your eyes? Moses responded to God, Master of the universe, if he is a suitable appointment in your eyes, then he is a suitable appointment in my eyes. The Holy One, blessed be God, said back to Moses, nevertheless, go and tell the Israelites and ask them their opinion. And so Moses goes to Israel and asks, is Bezalel suitable in your eyes? In other words, in order to appoint someone, even the most divine being on earth, even the most powerful, all-knowing, right, in the biblical imagination of God's godliness, God asks for Moses' consent and has Moses call for the people's consent. And then perhaps the single most democratic moment of all happens at Mount Sinai itself, when the Torah is not handed to a single leader or person alone, but to each and every person present, past, present, and future, who had to raise their voices at that moment to ratify the teaching, saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do it, and we will bear witness. Let's take a look at biblical Israel. Biblical Israel was largely a monarchy. The rulers of our people in biblical times were kings who received their authority based on their birth or based on their appointment from God, not because they were chosen from the people, although it was the people's choice to have a king. In rabbinic times, decisions were made by committee, a leadership council of 70 judges called the Sanhedrin, perhaps the inspiration for the Committee of 70, who oversees elections and such here in Philadelphia. Jeff Chebbett, you're going to have to look in on that for us. Which determined the law and the system of lower courts that adjudicated day-to-day affairs. After the destruction of the first and second temples, as Jews scattered across the diaspora to all corners of the world, decision-making was no longer in the hands of a single central authority, but rather fell to individual Jewish leaders and rabbis in their own diaspora communities. While they were each able to adhere to a central set of sacred texts, the Torah, the Talmud, other pieces of our oral tradition, they aligned their decisions very often to the needs of the moment and to the needs of the community. The appointment of those individual rabbis and leaders likely would not have happened by democratic process, but their authority inherently required some popular support because their decisions had sticking power only because of the respect they commanded from the people. This remained true through the modern period and even more so today in contemporary times, when individual Jews have the ability to vote with their feet, to select the flavor of Judaism that suits their lifestyle and their viewpoints. Of course, even today, not all systems are open equally to everyone. It took a very long time, for example, for women to become rabbis. And we still need to make huge amounts of progress as a community to confront the ableism, sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia that make our Jewish community less inclusive and therefore less democratic and representative of the voices of all. So at a glance at our history, the short answer seems to point very clearly away from Judaism as a religion grounded in democracy, or at least Judaism through the lens of our history does not mandate democracy. However, our tradition is deeply rooted in democratic principles and shows vestiges of early representation because it values the voice of the people and of the community. We can also find examples of when the beliefs and the customs of the people were put at a much higher value than those of rulers or even of God. There is a story in the Talmud that paints perhaps the most poignant example, the prime example of this, during a dispute about a certain oven, a tanor shel achnai. Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yehoshua, "If my opinion is the right one," again regarding this oven, and the dispute is not important, but rather where it ends, "let a carob tree fly into the air and prove it." And a carob tree was uprooted and did just that. Rabbi Yehoshua said, "If you don't learn Torah from carob trees." And so Rabbi Eliezer said, "If my opinion is right, let the water in the aqueducts flow backwards." And the water did. It flowed in the opposite direction. And Rabbi Yehoshua said, "You don't learn Torah from aqueducts." And then Rabbi Eliezer said, "Well, if my opinion is the right one, let the walls of our Beit Midrash, our house of study, prove it." And so the walls of the Beit Midrash started to fall in on them. And Rabbi Yehoshua said that the walls of the Beit Midrash did not have authority on Torah. And so finally, Rabbi Eliezer said, "If I am right, let the heavens prove it." And a voice, a bat kol, a heavenly voice came down and said, "The halacha agrees with Rabbi Eliezer about this." But Rabbi Yehoshua said, "No, lo bashamayim hi. The Torah is not for the heavens to decide." And at this, God smiled and said, "My children are victorious over me," meaning even God agreed that the practice of Judaism is for the people, not for God to decide. At some point, even this divine authority is superseded by the will of human beings, the practice of human beings, and the voice and the vote of each person. There are an abundance of such examples in the Talmud where the rabbis decided that in order to make a particular decision on halakha, on Jewish law, they would go out and see what the people were already doing. The custom of the people would help determine the right answer to the hypothetical scenarios they were considering. So although Judaism may not be democratic, it sure seems to me that it is certainly grounded in the core underlying prerequisite for democracy, active participation of the populace, a principle that is attested equally in our textual tradition in reference to the internal, that is Jewish communal, workings of government and development of laws, as we've seen, and also to the external, that is participation in the broader community on the civic level. There is a principle outlined in the Talmud, dina malchuta dina, that the law of the land is the law, which is to say that if there is a law in a community in which Jewish people are living that seems to counteract or come into direct conflict with a law of Jewish tradition, that dina malchuta dina, that the law of the land is the law. The value of Jewish people participating in local secular government, I think, is one of the things that makes dina malchuta dina, that the law of the land is the law, something that is able to uphold. In Midrash Tanhuma, we learn, if a person of learning participates in public affairs and serves as a judge or arbiter, that person brings stability to the whole land. What have affairs of state got to do with me? One might ask. Why should I trouble myself with the people's voices of protest? One might ask. Let my soul dwell in peace. If one says this, it is as if one has overthrown the world. And so we are commanded not only to have a voice in our Jewish community, but also Jewish people are commanded to have a voice within our larger civic community to bring peace to the land and not to overthrow systems of peace in delicate balance in pluralistic society. It is not surprising then that Jews took so quickly in modern times to the idea of democracy. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, a German rabbi in the 1800s during the time when the early reform movement was getting started, who later broke from these reformers to actually become the founder of modern Orthodoxy, wrote in one of his teachings on Haskalah, on enlightenment and on emancipation, "To be pushed back and limited upon the path of life, therefore, is not an essential condition of the exile, but on the contrary. It is our duty to join ourselves as closely as possible to the state, which receives us into its midst, to promote its welfare, and to not consider our well-being as in any way separate from that of the state to which we belong." Most American Jews came within several large waves of immigration to this country, adapting quickly to the ideals of democracy and becoming ardent participants in civic dialogue. Many of us are familiar with the stories of Jews in labor organizing, running for elected office, becoming lawyers, judges, Supreme Court justices, a proliferation of Jewish newspapers and publications, Jews as lifelong voters. It is no surprise then that the only movement of American Judaism that was birthed here on American soil, our own Reconstructionist movement, was founded on the principles of democracy. Not only were we primed for it in our texts, but it was in the water of our new home. We do not turn as Reconstructionists to a chief rabbi or a committee to make decisions for the movement with regard to Jewish norms and practice. Neither do we stand on the principle of individual autonomy, putting the impetus of decision-making on each and every Jewish person to make the choice that is correct for her. Rather, as Reconstructionist communities, we are empowered to engage in a democratic, values-based decision-making process, not only in our civic life, but in our synagogue life as well. One in which tradition has a vote, but not a veto. And so does every single member of the community. We make decisions together. My voice as rabbi is meant to be that of a teacher, a translator of tradition, a text broker, a guide on the side, but not that of a halachic decider. On the executive committee and the board level, I as a rabbi do not actually get a vote at all. I sit as a non-voting member, and that, in a democracy indeed, is the way it should be. So where does that leave us on this place of the vote? The next evolution of our story, both as Jewish people and of Americans, is on our horizon. But we know that it is far from the last chapter. We know this from our Jewish history. And in our current chapter, it is our values as Jews, as Americans, as Reconstructionists, and as people that lead us to the only conclusion that we need to help to restore one certain democracy that is much more fragile than any of us could have imagined, and one which is failing at its most essential mission, giving a voice to the people. It is a year when we know there will be insufficient polls open in many urban areas, when the Postal Service may struggle to deliver mail-in ballots, when the government in our country has been clear that they will take every step to not preserve the right of every person to vote, and perhaps even to get in their way by removing drop-off boxes, both for the Postal Service and election-specific drop boxes, even here in our home state of Pennsylvania. It is a year when there is blatant and unchecked foreign intervention in our elections, a divided press, and a year in which we may not know for weeks the result of the election. And there may be a hotly contested and very violent few weeks as that unfolds. The importance of voting this year and the importance of active participation in our civic community, not only hunkering down within our Jewish community, but getting out there and preserving the laws of the land, volunteering at polling places, ensuring that our votes are counted, protecting the rights of those whose rights are perhaps infringed upon, cannot be understated. That each one of us would have a vote and a choice is at the center of who we are and what we believe as Reconstructionist Jews, as Jewish people, and as Americans. So I implore you to vote. I'd like to imagine that at Or Hadash, we could have a 100% voting record from amongst the congregants who are eligible to vote. So I am going to take a few moments right here and right now to make sure we all know how to vote this year. And I want to thank Rebecca Kersner, my incredible wife and partner in crime, for both helping to craft the incredible textual arguments in this sermon, and also who pulled together this wonderful guide on voting and how to register for and ensure that you are able to vote in this election. So Rebecca teaches. Number 1, make sure that you are registered to vote. Everyone should go online as soon as possible to confirm this and make absolutely sure that you have not been dropped from the voter roll. If you have not registered, do it as soon as you can. The deadline to register is October 19th. If you are interested in voting by mail, you should know that one major change in Pennsylvania since the last presidential election is that anyone can now vote by mail. You no longer have to state a reason for it. To vote by mail, and let me be clear about this, you must go online and request an online ballot. Some states are automatically sending out mail-in ballots to every person. Pennsylvania is not one of them. If you plan to vote by mail, request your ballot as soon as possible to give as much time as possible for elected officials to mail it to you and for the Postal Service to deliver it and for you to mail it back on time. As soon as you get it, there are 2 options. Fill it out and mail it back immediately or deliver it to a drop-off location. Please take care to make sure you fill it out meticulously. In the last election, many thousands of ballots were thrown out because they were not filled out correctly. And who knows, those ballots could have influenced the election results. And if you are interested in voting in person, pay close attention to where you need to go. It has still not been determined how many polling places will open up and whether your polling place may have changed. I know that mine has twice. It did for the primary, and I'm set to be voting in a different polling place for the general, and it may yet change again. And then, in addition, almost all voting machines have been replaced in the state of Pennsylvania over the past 2 years, so the machine might look different from the one that you're accustomed to. And so, we vote. We figure out, we determine what we need to do in order for our voices to be counted, and we ensure that they are, and we ensure that our neighbors are, and we ensure that we all are able to be consulted around our new leadership. And so I end with one final text. In Pirkei Avot, it is taught by Rabbi Tarfon, "It is not up to you to finish the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. Lishana tova tikatevu v'techatemun. May you be written and sealed for a good year, and may we each also take up the authority as those created B'Tselem Elohim in the image of the divine, our writing implements, and use our voice and our vote to inscribe and seal our townships, our states, and our nation for a good year."